So welcome to everybody joining us on this soggy Tuesday afternoon, at least soggy, I should say, if you're in the Northeast Kingdom, where Bobby and I are. My name is Drew Bush, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Fairbanks Museum, and we're excited to have you all here, whether you're on YouTube or Zoom or on Kingdom Access Television or your local affiliate. And if you're in Zoom, I just wanted to let you know the reason we have this as a live session is so you can ask Bobby your questions today about the night sky and then get out there and be able to go check it out yourself. So to that end, you can use the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. That's a great place for questions. You can also use the chat box and you'll see a message from me to all of you in there welcoming you. If you're on YouTube or you're on local cable television, feel free to shoot me an email either before, during, or after class. We do have another session on Thursdays at 2:30, so any questions we don't get to this time, we'll have Bobby answer then. My email is dbush@fairbanksmuseum.org. That's dbush, B-U-S-H, and I look forward to hearing your questions. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to our dynamic and exciting guide to the night sky, Bobby Farlice-Rubio.
Well, thank you, Drew, and welcome everyone. I know if you live in this part of Vermont, you're not going to be seeing much outside in the sky, but the good news is the weather forecast says the rain will end sometime around sunset. So you may see some things in the sky, but it's a new moon around now. So that means the sky is going to be as dark as possible. If it stays cloudy, that'll look kind of ominous. But if the clouds do go away, you might get to see a meteor shower. Right now, we're getting close to the peak of the Lyrid Meteor Shower. I'll talk more about that later, because maybe you won't see that tonight, but meteor showers are not a one-night thing. There's meteors every night, and a meteor shower usually lasts a couple of days or more than a week, and they have a peak in the middle when you're most likely to see the meteors. That peak is supposed to be tomorrow. However, you could see just as many meteors tonight or the night after tomorrow, so don't let that date fool you. A meteor shower is a long-term, several-day event, but let's talk about what else is in the sky. And I want to talk about a little bit of an obscure constellation that you might see when looking for Leo the Lion. So here we are in Stellarium, showing a little bit of advanced season with the leaves and the grass, but still, we'll use this free program that you can download on stellarium.org and follow along or use this to practice, and we'll see the sun in the sky. And today's sunset is going to be around 7:40. Not that you'll probably see it with the clouds in the air, but just a quick review of some of the other things that are always going on in this year's springtime sky. And then we'll talk about that meteor shower at the end. So now I slowed down time using the J button on the Stellarium keyboard there, and I can make time slow down so that we can watch a beautiful sunset. I'm going to move our view because remember, if you're out any night when the sky is clear at sunset, you will probably see Venus, this planet, before any other lights appear in the sky. And of course, even though we're getting most of the way through April, we're still going to see some of the host of winter constellations that are going to be gracefully saying goodbye, leaving the stage on the western side as the month goes on. So that'll include the constellations we've talked about on previous episodes of these online planetarium shows, like Orion and Canis Major and Canis Minor. Now you're seeing them, and not far from where Venus is, you're seeing the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades, also known by its Japanese name, Subaru. And there's Aldebaran, the brightest star of Taurus, the bull. So you have this to look forward to seeing. If the sky is clear tonight, you will be able to see these winter constellations. But I also want to mention one of the constellations that I think of as being a sign of spring. So we're going to look a little bit more due south to find the mighty lion. This constellation, Leo, is high up in the southern skies. In fact, if you recognize Leo's name, it's because that is also one of the members of the zodiac constellations. I know we've talked about this before, including the bright star Regulus, but I need to help remind you of Leo to help you find something that's a little more tricky to see. So let's remember that Leo the lion is that constellation that goes back to the ancient Egyptians, and the cartoon drawing in Stellarium does a pretty good job of matching up with the stars. And right above Regulus, its brightest star, you can see a hook shape in the stars, a sickle shape that makes the head and the mane of the lion. There's his eye. I like to see that as his nose. And then you can imagine that this trapezoid here is his body. Here is his bright tail, a star called Denebula. But wait, is that all there is to his tail? Well, I'll get into that in a second. But here are his hind legs down here. And Leo is not a constellation that's difficult to find. If you get stuck, just remember that hook shape, that sickle shape that makes his head with a bright star Regulus, and you'll be able to find it easily. But I want to teach you about a funny constellation in the sky that gets a lot of attention. Once you notice it, you'll always see it, but you may not have noticed it before. It's this one over here that has the funny name Coma Berenices. And at first glance, it looks like a triangular shape made up of a very great number of dim stars. So it's not a blockbuster constellation made up of radiant stars. It's actually just a cool little pattern. And I remember one time doing a star party in Brownington, Vermont, at the old Stonehouse Museum up there, where a kid said, "It looks like somebody's hair." And I laughed because I said, that's exactly what somebody thought in 300 BC when they named it. And it's crazy that a kid today looking up in that pattern of the stars came up with the same idea that a famous astronomer named Conan, not Conan of Bryan, but Conan of Samos, who lived in ancient Greek times, 300 BC roughly. He was actually the court astrologer for Ptolemy III, a king of Egypt that lived after the Greek Empire fell apart. He lived in a society that was trilingual. Everything that they wrote was written in hieroglyphics and in Greek and in the Demotic language. So it's pretty cool cultural time in history. And there was an astronomer there who came up with the idea that this looked like hair. But let me explain, just to give you a little historical context. Before this was called Coma Berenices, other folks around the world had other names for these stars. In fact, the ancient Arab astronomers considered that to be the bushy end of Leo the lion's tail. So if you remember Leo over here, let me put up the cartoon. Notice that his tail ends here where Denebula is, this star. But to the ancient Arab astronomers, his tail didn't really end there. It kind of continued up to this little pointy, fuzzy patch made up of lots of stars, just like how a real lion's tail ends with that tuft of hair, similar to a paintbrush. So I like that idea because it makes Leo even more elegant and more astounding in the sky, taking up even greater amount of space. But perhaps Conan of Samos, the court astrologer in ancient Greek times, knew that that was part of Leo the lion. But there's a funny story about what happened during a time of war. You see, King Ptolemy III had to go to war during what we now know in history as the Third Syrian War, a war within the ancient Greek Empire. And his wife was Queen Berenice II. And according to the story, in order to secure her husband's safe return from war, she sacrificed her long, beautiful locks of hair. She cut them off, shorn her hair, and gave them to the priests at the temple in honor of all of the gods that they worshiped at the time. So she said, I give all of the gods my hair to make my husband come home safely from this terrible war. Well, the next morning, the hair was missing from the altar, and no one knew why. Perhaps a thief had taken it, but perhaps some heads were going to roll in the court, advisors and the counselors. So Conan of Samos came up with a great story. He said, "No, look, Your Majesty, her hair was not stolen from the temple. The gods have accepted Berenice's gift, and now her hair is forever amongst the stars." And that's what Coma Berenices means. It's the hair of Berenice. Well, let's see what the Stellarium cartoon looks like. It looks like a ponytail, like cut off. And you see this triangle here just showing 3 bright stars. But really, this is a tricky constellation. You probably wouldn't be able to find it if it wasn't for the fact that Leo the lion is right next to it. So just imagine the extension of Leo's tail. And then just remember that story of an astrologer, Conan of Samos, perhaps making up the most creative story on the spot ever made to save someone's career and life in the history of astronomy. I think that story takes the cake. So also interesting about Coma Berenices is that it's the only constellation known to be named after a person who truly existed in history. So we have constellations like Hercules, but he's a mythological character. But Berenice II was a real queen, and we have a constellation named after her hair. That's the only constellation out of all 88 named after a real person in history. Pretty weird little fact about Coma Berenices there. But just to show you a couple of other ways to see it, because it looks like a lot of little stars clustered together, some of my favorite other stories about what this could be come from one of the Native American cultures, the Pawnee people, who are native to originally Nebraska and now live in Oklahoma. And in the Pawnee culture, this is actually an elk skin that contains a star map. So how cool is that? It's a miniature version of the sky in the sky, like a map of the sky inside the sky, like a microcosmos in the macrocosmos. So for the Pawnee people, they had a clever idea that this was a map of the stars hidden in the stars itself. And another story comes to us from the people, the Burung people that we know collectively in America as the Aborigines of Australia. They say that this is a bunch of little birds drinking from the crotch of a tree. And I know that sounds weird because the crotch of the tree looks upside down, but if you lived in Australia, you would see that constellation inverted in the land down under, and it would look like a V. And then you can imagine how it does look like a little flock of birds all congregating on a central vertex right there at the crotch of a tree. So have fun with that one. Consider Coma Berenices sort of one of the deep tracks of the sky, nothing like Leo the Lion or Orion for ease of finding. But once you do find it, you can wonder about all these funny stories that unite around this little patch of fuzzy stars, kind of like the Seven Sisters. This is one of those little spots that once it gets your attention, you'll always look for it, especially now in the spring when it's becoming easily visible. So looks like I don't think we have any questions coming in, Drew. So I'm going to move on, zooming out of the sky just to give you the big picture, putting up the picture of Leo the Lion. Remember Virgo, Persephone, we've talked about her in previous shows if you want to get an update on that constellation. But Coma Berenices is right behind Leo the Lion. That's the easiest way to find it by far. But I want to talk about some of the things that are coming up in the sky as you stay up later. If you do go out, you know, this time when it starts to get dark, the way it's, you know, getting dark later and later as we're getting closer to summer. And at this time, you'd have to stay up until about 9 o'clock for the sky to be this dark. And it's around 9 o'clock that you might see a bright new, very bright star arriving in our sky that you haven't seen for months. Now, there's Arcturus up there with Boötes, but down here is a star that I haven't talked about in this online series yet because, well, you would have had to have been a night owl to see it in March and in early April, but now by 9 it's available. And if you stay up later, you'll see the star called Viga. I know everybody wants to say Vega, and everybody might think it has something to do with Las Vegas, but actually Viga comes from its Arabic name, which is Al-Vika, and Al-Vika means the diving eagle. But that's not the name of the constellation that it's in. So let me explain by first staying up late with you folks. Now we're getting close to 10 p.m. Notice where Viga is, and I'm going to advance the clock even faster because I know it's going to get past midnight soon. I don't expect you folks to stay up this late, but I do want you to know that Viga is the first of the 3 stars that we consider the summer triangle, along with Altair and Deneb. Viga is the brightest of the 3, and because if you look at its orientation to the horizon, it's the first one to rise. So you're going to see Viga tonight at 9 or in the next few nights at 9, but you might have to wait a couple more hours to see Deneb and Altair, and you're going to have to wait till, you know, the summer for that triangle to be fully visible as soon as it gets dark, which is why we call it the summer triangle. It heralds the coming of summer. So think of seeing Viga as a sneak preview of the summer to come. And the reason why I'm focusing so much on Viga is that Viga is part of the constellation we call Lyra. And Lyra is the constellation that is the host to the Lyrid Meteor Shower that is happening right now. Unfortunately, maybe not tonight, but another night, or if you're willing to stay up late till when the clouds clear in the early morning hours before the sunrise. But let me teach you a little bit about this constellation, Lyra, before I go on to talk about the meteor shower. Now, before I show you the lyre, the harp-like instrument that the ancient Greeks used to play, let me show you why we call this star Viga. Al-Vika, remember that Arabic word that means the diving eagle? Well, if you look at this constellation in the way I see it, it looks like what the last thing a mouse will see, or a fish or a snake, when an eagle's about to pounce on it from the sky. Pretend that Viga is one of the eagle's eyes. Here's the other one, and here's the other one that makes the beak, this little point. So there are two eyes, and the point that makes a beak, this little triangle, is a bird's head. And then just imagine that this row of stars on this side that is almost perfectly mirrored on the other side by this row of stars, they create the illusion of tucked in wings, like a bird that is swooping down onto its prey. That is why I think the ancient Arab astronomers called this the diving eagle, and that name, Al-Vika, became the name of that star to astronomers in Europe during the Renaissance times. They just shortened it to Viga. And if you see that Viga bird, the Al-Vika, the diving eagle, then you might be connecting to another picture. But in today's astronomy, modern astronomers know this as Lyra, which refers to the lyre of Orpheus. Orpheus, a character in the Hadestown musical, just like Persephone Virgo. That is why you see this picture here. And if you ever played in high school band or, marching band, you probably recognize that the lyre is the international symbol of bands, and it's usually the shape of the clip on a trumpet that holds your music. That is an ancient musical instrument. Before there were electric guitars and acoustic guitars, there were lyres, and we actually have a Kissar lyre from ancient Egypt. Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say it's that ancient. It's only hundreds of years old, not thousands of years old. But in our Fairbanks Museum's collection, on display in our musical instrument section, we have a lyre from Egypt that resembles the basic shape of this lyre in the sky. The problem with my imagination is that I don't see that lyre in the cartoon that Stellarium provided. I see instead it's a little out of alignment, because in my mind, these things that were the wings of the diving eagle, these are the frames on the side of the lyre, and there's the top. So maybe this is where the tuning pegs are, and the strings would run down the middle, and maybe this big trapezoid down here is the sound box. I think in ancient Greek mythology, there's a story about Hermes inventing this by using a tortoise shell to make the resonator, the sound box, like on a banjo, the drum, or on a guitar, the box. And he used some sticks and some gut strings to make the instrument. So there's even ancient Greek myths about the invention of the lyre. And that's where we get the word lyrics, like when we're singing along to a song, because lyric poetry was poems that were sung with a lyre. So the word lyric, when we sing along to our favorite song, actually comes from the same word that this constellation got its name. So back to the meteor shower. Let's zoom out a little bit. I made you stay up till midnight to see Lyra that high in the sky. So let me just cheat real quick and jump back in time to an earlier hour where you might more likely be out. Let's see. Let's see. 11, 10. There you go. So around 9, like I said earlier, 9 is when you'll be able to see Viga easily, even if you can't see the shape of the lyre. And the reason why we have a meteor shower called the Lyrid Meteor Shower is because it looks like the meteors are coming from that direction in the sky near Viga. So a meteor shower doesn't mean you have to look in the direction of the constellation. You don't have to look there to see the meteors. They will be zooming, hopefully, across the entire sky, but they will seem to all start in that direction. This is a concept in astronomy called the radiant. Just like how if you draw a little spot and you make lines that go out of it, they radiate out like radial radius. The radiant is the spot where all the meteors seem to be coming from. They're not really coming from that direction, because remember, those meteors are not coming from faraway stars. They're actually dust in our solar system. And imagine that the Earth is actually moving around the sun like a car going down the highway. We're going 67,000 miles an hour. And whether that dust is moving quickly or slowly, our planetary windshield, called the atmosphere, plows into that stardust, and little grains of rock and maybe stuff smaller than a grain of rice, but still when it hits it, it hits our atmosphere so hard that those little pieces get friction with the air and they burn up and make those beautiful things we call shooting stars. So basically what's happening is in our local solar system, Earth is plowing through a cloud of gnats, or you could say, stardust gnats, and they're smearing up our windshield. And all those streaks that we see, and they make a little bit of a gross comparison, are kind of like the bug guts that you see splattering your windshield in June or so when you drive late at night. So perhaps the gross comparison, but that'll help you understand of the dynamic system that we live on this planet that's moving, and it's plowing through dust that is lingering in our orbit, stuff in the road that the Earth is going to plow through right now. So that's what the source of material that makes these so-called shooting stars. We call them meteors in science, and they're not stars, but just little bits of dust, sometimes rocks, maybe occasionally something really big that makes a fireball that burns in the sky, and you can actually see dust and smoke lingering in the trail for several minutes. This is what happens sometimes with Lyrids. So Lyrids can have really beautiful fireballs, bolides as they're called in science. Those are the really bright meteors, and it can have scores of regular, really fast-moving, quick, dim meteors. But apparently, and I really wish I could see this one day, in 1803, an observer in Richmond, Virginia, saw 700 meteors per hour falling from the sky. And this was 1803. So just imagine, back in those days before electricity, and people had telescopes, but he described it as rockets, which I remember, even in our national anthem, rockets, red glare, that word was used to describe what would be essentially bottle rockets to us, nothing like the fancy rockets that NASA and SpaceX flies. But he described it as rockets falling onto the Earth. So can you imagine 700 meteors per hour? You would think all the stars were falling, and in 1803, it would probably be believable to a lot of people that was the sky falling. Everybody might have seemed like Chicken Little running around freaking out. That can happen during a Lyrid meteor shower. That's what happened in 1803 in Richmond, Virginia. I don't expect that to happen tonight or tomorrow night or anytime this week, but that is the potential for this meteor shower. Most likely, it's going to be something like 40 meteors per hour. That's just one every couple minutes or so. So I hope you go out and see it, folks. And if anybody does do that, go out and see this, please let us know that you succeeded. And also, if anybody out there is a photographer, if you are good at doing long exposures and astrophotography, this is your time. Maybe if you get a clear view of Viga, you can take a picture for a long time, get a long exposure, and you will discover the radiant, because your long exposure will show all these little streaks flying out of a common point near that bright star that's rising at 9 p.m. tonight. So I think that's about all for today's gaze into the sky. But Drew, did anybody pop up with any questions?
Oh, I think it might have been a soggy day today for astronomy. So a little bit of a quiet audience, but I think a really lovely introduction to what we'll be seeing over the next few nights.
Yeah, it's something that's going to be, the Viga and Lyra, the constellation, you'll be able to see for the rest of this season, all the way until fall. But the Lyrid Meteor Shower, you've got maybe another week or so. So that's a good orient yourself. But now, just one more time, just to remind people, the best tips for seeing meteors is not to stare in the direction where the radiant is, because the brightest part of the meteor's path might be far from the radiant, might be when it reaches the other side of the sky. So if it's not raining and it's nice, bundle up, lay a blanket out on the lawn, lay on your back and look straight up and maximize the view of the sky that you have. And that's how you maximize the chance of seeing meteors. And then you'll notice that most of them will be coming from east to west, or, from the eastern side of the sky and moving in all directions from that point. So let us know if you get successful pictures, or just let us know if you get to see any of these beautiful meteors, and keep looking up. And thank you, Drew. I hope you stay dry, and I hope you get to see the sky sometime soon.
Yeah, and thank you, Bobby. What a wonderful lesson. And thank you, everyone who joined us this afternoon. We'll be back, of course, on Thursday with more Looking Up at the Night Sky with Bobby at 2:30 again on Thursday. So I hope everybody has a wonderful night, and maybe I hope things even clear up and you can go out and check out some of those things Bobby was just talking about. Have a good night, everyone.